Hi everyone, welcome back to another Plant Chats. So I know I haven't been active on this page for a while, which I do apologize for. At times I have found myself pretty busy. Other times I've just found myself a bit unmotivated, but I'm back and hopefully I'm back for good. So I wanted to well, first of all, I know I said welcome back to another plant chats. I just like to call these little videos plant chats, but in reality, they're honestly sometimes a lot more than plants. We've gone over a lot of different scientific phenomena, like why the ocean is salty, or other things. I can't even really remember exactly everything I've gone over on this page, but yeah, anyways. So today's video I wanted to focus on life and sales. No, specifically sales, I should say. So I'm gonna talk about some very broad information, like general topics. I'm not gonna go deep. I'm not gonna like talk about plant sales specifically or anything, but I'm just gonna talk about sales and life. So to start off, how do we define life? So there's actually a few different factors for defining something that is living. Um, and yes, so like we're defining something as living as if it has life by a few different characteristics. So one of those characteristics is, first of all, cellular organization. So what does this mean? Basically, this means that the organism must be composed of cells. So how would we differentiate a human from a car based off of whether or not it's living? Well, first of all, obviously it's very different, but when it comes to humans, we're composed of cells. Cars, on the other hand, there's no cells to be found there. Maybe like atoms. Well, atoms make up everything, but I hope you know what I mean. So there's no cells in cars, first of all. So one of the characteristics of living organisms is cells, cellular structure, and all that, because cells are the most basic structural functional unit of life. So cells are the smallest unit of life that exists. So without cells, there's no life. Um, After that, another characteristic is reproduction. So by reproduction, we mean when organisms either sexually or asexually reproduce and uh, give off offspring or give birth to offspring. So this looks different in a lot of organisms. Obviously, humans sexually reproduce. So when a sperm cell enters an egg cell and produces a zygote, that's how we reproduce as humans. On the other hand, though, there are some organisms that reproduce asexually, meaning they don't necessarily require a partner to give birth to offspring. Um, but yeah, I also wanted to talk about the different types of cells. So there's also prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Um, Eukaryotic cells are a lot more complex than prokaryotic ones are. Um, I'm not going to talk too much about the differences though, but basically eukaryotic cells are more complex because of their nucleus and things like that. So eukaryotic cells, there's both multicellular organisms and unicellular organisms. So some of these unicellular organisms are going to be things like bacteria or amoebas, algae, for example. Some, not all, of course. And then multicellular organisms, things like plants, humans, animals, fungi, and much more. Obviously, I don't know every single thing, but yeah. Anyways, going on. Please ignore that plane. Pretty loud. But yeah, another characteristic of life is Oh, sorry. I already talked about reproduction. another characteristic is metabolism and energy use. So I know you guys always hear metabolism, but could anyone even like explain what that really is? Well, it's not that hard. Metabolism is basically just the sum of chemical reactions going on in our bodies. So there's two types of metabolism. There's uh catabolist. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Anabolic and catabolic reactions. So in catabolic reactions, there's two things that are being taken apart to create. There's one species being broken down into two different species. And I don't mean like animal species, I mean just like things basically. And then in anabolic reactions, two things are being transformed into one. So yeah. They both require energy. I I think one of them requires more energy than the other to take place. I believe anabolic no, excuse me. I believe catabolic reactions require more energy to take place. But anyways, um, going back to the characteristics of life, another characteristic is homeostasis. And homeostasis is just an organism's ability to maintain internal stability. So whether that be in their cells and tissues, whatnot. So like a famous example for homeostasis in humans is when the temperature gets too hot, when we overheat, we start to sweat. So the drops of water that we excrete will help cool down the surface of our skin by taking some of that heat with it when it evaporates. So that's one of the most famous examples of homeostasis. Obviously, homeostasis looks different in a bunch of different organisms. I don't know what it looks like in all, but yes. Next we have heredity, and this is just inherited information from parents to offspring. So things like physical traits, genes, all that. And the other characteristic that I can think of, I'm not sure if there's one more, I can't really remember. But the last characteristic that I'm going to talk about is response to stimuli. So this is an organism's ability to like adapt or respond to any changes in its environment. So for example, when it comes to plants, when it comes to plants, let's talk about cacti. So cacti live in very arid environments where water is pretty sparse. Sparse. Can't really think of the difference. But cacti have evolved to store water in their cells better. So over time, plants, first of all, let's say this, plants can't move. They're not humans, they don't have legs, they can't get up and move from their environment. So they must be able to adapt. Cacti have adapted by being able to store water in their cells better to avoid any water loss. So yeah. So going back to cells, talking about cells, let's mostly talk about the human body today. I'm not exactly too sure everything about plants, but I have a better understanding of the human body for now. So when it comes to cells, we don't just have the same cell everywhere throughout our body. There's obviously different cells. There's brain cells like neurons. There's red blood cells, erythrocytes, white blood cells, leukocytes. So these cells are all differentiated. They're all specialized. We have some cells in our body called stem cells, which have the ability to divide and then produce specialized cells. So yeah, there's different specialized cells that have different functions in our body. That's what makes everything so complex. So cells get together. Well, first of all, cells are made up of molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. So It goes from atoms to molecules to cells. Cells gather, common cells gather to form a function, which leads to tissues. No, excuse me. Common cells group together, which leads to a tissue. Tissues group together to form organs, which have functions. Organs get together and form organ systems, and then these organ systems give rise to an organism. So that's basically that's the basic structure of life, all the way from the atomic level to the organismal level, which is pretty cool, right? So I think that's really cool. So then let's also talk about what makes plants plants. So plants are composed of eukaryotic cells. These are the more complex cells I talked about earlier. So they're also multicellular. This is one of the characteristics of plants. So plants must be multicellular in order to be considered plants. So even though we think of for example, even though we think of seaweed as a plant, it's really not a plant. It's an algae. There's some algae that is not multicellular, which is they are unicellular, so they can't really be classified as plants. Another characteristic of plants is that they're photosynthetic. The same goes for algae. Algae is also photosynthetic. I'm referring to seaweed specifically. So seaweed is also photosynthetic. Why isn't it a plant? Well, like I said earlier, it's some of it. Some of them are unicellular, but also the last characteristic that makes a plant is that it must be terrestrial. So seaweed don't live on land. We can't find seaweed in forests. Seaweed live in the ocean, in bodies of water. So there's two reasons we can't classify most seaweed as plants. First of all, some seaweeds are unicellular. Well, their cells, they're unicellular, and second of all, they're not terrestrial. They are photosynthetic though, which is a characteristic of plants. So yeah, like I said earlier, even though there are like specialized cells, which are able to differentiate, and yes, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. They are still pretty much the same. So, some cells may have different organelles. Organelles are just parts of the cell that have different functions. So, like, you've all heard of the mitochondria, for example, that's an organelle. There's also ribosomes, which help the cell produce proteins, or compose proteins, I should say. Then there's like the nucleus, which stores the genetic information, or DNA, and blah blah blah, a bunch of different organelles. I'm not gonna cover all of them today, but yeah, and then I think, yeah, I'm not gonna go over the organelles today. I could save that for another video, but I also kind of wanted to talk about things that we find in nature that help contribute to life. Oh, it's gotten pretty dark here. I'm gonna wrap up this video pretty soon. So there's also these things called macromolecules, which are the basis of life. So macromolecules, there's four. There's lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. Lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. I'm forgetting one more. I always forget one. Oh my god. Oh, and proteins. Wow, what an important one. How could I forget such an important one? But yeah, there's proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, and carbohydrates. Those are the four macromolecules essential to life, and obviously water. Literally, I don't know any living thing that can live without water. Obviously, some can go longer without water, but at the end of the day, they all need water to survive. And water is just so cool. I'm so surprised that I haven't made a dedicated video to just water, because there's so much that we can talk about water. It has so many different properties. It's just amazing. Like, wow. Like, I'm really surprised I haven't talked about water. But yeah. Let's go over some quick facts about these macromolecules. So carbohydrates Carbohydrates are basically sugars. That's very like basic definition of carbohydrates. They're sugars. Um, well, sugars are important to organisms for energy. You know, we use up sugars as quick energy. So that's one of their main functions. Obviously, they have way more, but yeah. And let's talk about lipids now. So lipids are just fats. Um, Lipids are great at storing energy. So this is why um, lipids are macromolecules essential to life. One of the characteristics of life is actually energy usage. So lipids store these energies. Excuse me, this energy. There's obviously different types of fats, but I'm not going to get into that today. Um, Finally, not finally, excuse me. Then we also have proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. So there's, amino acids form these long chains called proteins. So proteins are essential to life. One of the most important functions of proteins that I can think about right off the bat are enzymes. So enzymes are proteins. So let's get this straight. All enzymes are proteins, but not all proteins are enzymes. So, what are enzymes? I know we hear that a lot too. Enzymes are just proteins that help lower the activation energy required for reactions to take place. So, some reactions may require a lot of activation energy. Activation energy just refers to the energy it takes to get the process started. So, enzymes are going to help lower this activation energy, which is extremely important. They basically allow us to undergo all these metabolic processes. So yeah, enzymes are really cool too. Then lastly, for the four macromolecules, let's talk about nucleic acids. So nucleic acids, uh, like DNA and RNA, these are important because they help store genetic information. I'm not going to talk about DNA today too much, but basically, DNA and RNA are extremely important because these are like the codes or recipes for life. So, there's a bunch of different steps to, you know, translation, transcription, all of this. I'm not going to get into it today because I would also like to study it a bit more to make a video on it. When I feel really confident in being able to explain it, I will make a video on it. So stay tuned. So yeah, I'm not going to get into plant cells today specifically, but I will try to make a video soon, and I will try to be more consistent with my content because I know recently I have been logged off for quite a while. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really had a good time talking about this. I really love biology and all the sciences. I think they're all really cool. I love nature, so science speaks to me because, well, science aims to explain the natural world, which is everything we observe. But yeah, anyways, enough of that. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned. I will try to stay consistent with content. But yeah, have a nice day. Thank you for watching.